Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Guest has been escorted by the Vice Chancellor. Please put your hands together in welcoming the Chief. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The Chief Guest has arrived. I now request Emma from the Office of Associate Dean Flexible Learning to please accord a warm welcome to the Chief Guest by garlanding the Chief Guest. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together once again. Thank you. Thank you, Emma, for the honor. The guest of honor, Mr. Gareth BABER, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nigel Healy, the Pro-Vice Chancellor Learning and Teaching, Professor James Pounder, Deans, Directors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It's with profound pleasure I welcome you all to this unique and first and the best of its kind Successful Leaders in Conversational Series at the Fiji National University. We are here to learn the language of leadership. The primary focus of this conversation series is to make sure that all of us at Fiji National University are well equipped with the tools and techniques to accelerate as good leaders. The Pro-Vice Chancellor Learning and Teaching, Professor James Pounder, is making it happen here by bringing to us a community of leaders from all around the place and around the world. The agenda is to give us a collaborative learning experience that will prepare us for the challenges in the globalized world. Today is the beginning, and we have amongst us Mr. Gareth BABER, the renowned and the very famous Fiji Sevens rugby coach. It's now with added pleasure. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's now with added pleasure that I invite the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nigel Healy, to deliver his welcome address and introduce the guest of honor. Professor Nigel, please.
So, Chief Guest, David, you're very welcome. Professor Chancellor Learning and Teaching, to all our colleagues and friends from the university, thank you particularly to the students for coming. We know that it's your study break ahead of the end of semester exams, so for those of you who've come along today, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, and I think as you've just heard, in a sense he needs no introduction. We know that he's the coach of the Fiji Sevens, currently world champions after a very gripping series in 2018-19, where they just in the last couple of rounds seized back the world championship. But I just want to say just a few words about him. He's Welsh. We've established some common links. My father was also Welsh and played for Cardiff and London Welsh, but not to the level that I think that Gareth did. Gareth earned a blue for Oxford University's rugby team. He was a scrum half for Pontypridd. He was featured prominently in Pontypridd's European Shield victory over London Irish in 2001 when he moved to the wing. After finishing an active playing career, he was assistant coach with the Welsh side, the under 20s. He was also the academy skills coach at the Welsh regional team, Cardiff, what's now called Cardiff Blues. And in 2011, he was appointed as head coach of the Cardiff Blues, following the resignation of Guy Young. He's moved around quite a lot. We were talking about the fact that his father was a professor of economics at Cardiff University and used to run summer schools around the world. And Gareth would travel with his father because his father had multiple sclerosis. So Gareth had the opportunity to work with his father organising summer schools in a number of different parts of the world, and he's kind of got that slight itchy feet. And in November 2013, he became head of the Hong Kong men's rugby sevens and directed the senior men's, the women's and the youth programmes at the elite level. And he's been with us since October 2016 when he signed a 4-year contract with Fiji Rugby Union. And since becoming the head coach, he's won 10 tournaments, including, of course, the World Championship in 2018-19. And I think in talking about leadership, one of the things that I think Jim's going to be very interested in, and certainly we've been talking for the last half hour or so, is the challenge of leading, particularly after the period that came immediately before. So in some cases, it's relatively easy to come in and take over a leadership role when the organisation you're coming into is in difficulty or needs a change of direction. But of course, Gareth joined after the Fiji Sevens under Ben Ryan had just won 2 successive World Championships and the Olympic gold. In Gareth's era, he's had to rebuild the team and take them back to that level of performance that they were at then. So I'm absolutely fascinated to hear what he's got to say. It's been great to get to know you somewhat. I'm looking forward over the next hour or so to get to know you a lot more. So,
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Leadership is all about establishing a compelling vision and a direction for a team to strive to achieve. It's the grooming that gets it going, and it's the leadership conversation that makes it happen. Now, I kindly request the Pro-Vice Chancellor Learning and Teaching, Professor James Pounder, to get the ball rolling and begin the conversation. Professor Pounder, please.
Get the ball rolling. Now, I think we're departing, I think, from the normal sort of approach to these type of talks. Normally, I think we would find that Gareth would be standing up and giving a sort of a speech. And with the best will in the world, most of us, I think, lose our concentration after about 15 or 20 minutes. And that's nothing to do with him, it's to do with everybody that has to stand up and give a speech. I'm sure we'd be much more interested in Gareth than we would with many of the other speeches that I've endured, let's put it that way. But we've decided to change the format because, what we've had over the months I've got to know Gareth, we've had lots of conversations on the approach that he uses in terms of, coaching the sevens and so on. And I want to sort of tease out of him some of the stuff which we've discussed for the benefit of us all. He's quite at liberty to digress from my questions, that's fine, but at least we have some sort of framework within which he can sort of look at and explore things that I'm sure will be of interest. And remember, whilst we're going to be talking about, the sevens as a sport, what we're particularly focusing on as well is leadership. So this is leading, being a successful, in fact, I think it's fair to say, world-class coach in the sporting world. And how do you lead sportsmen? So I think this is one of the central features of our discussions. So I think, first of all, just to get the ball rolling, I think one of the things I would say is, how did you make the transition from a player to a coach? What drove you to be a coach rather than just retire and do something else?
Well, firstly, can I just say Baraka for having me here today. It's a big honour for myself to be here and speaking on things that sometimes I don't think people would be particularly interested in, but obviously there is a story to tell, and I'm sure hopefully over the next hour we'll be able to communicate a little bit of that. But I suppose back to your question, how did I end up in coaching? I never saw myself as a coach. I played rugby, I was invincible, I was Superman, and that's generally what we're taught to think of as being athletes, especially when you get the opportunity, blessed to be able to travel the world and play the game that you love. But I came from a background of academics as well. My mother was a school teacher, my father, as has just been stated, was an economics lecturer in Cardiff University. And somewhere in there I probably got a little bit of the bug of teaching. I still regard myself as a teacher. I don't really regard myself as a coach. I know the sevens coach tag here in Fiji carries with it something else, but I do generally regard myself as an individual who's here to guide people and to get the best out of the individuals that I have influence upon. My career was, fortunately for me, was a long one. I didn't retire until I was about 34. But it was obvious probably towards the end of my playing career that even though I had studied, and I ended up doing my studies in transport, and I got a master's degree in transport where I thought I was going to find my new career. But it was obvious that combining my rugby knowledge with my desire to get the best out of others was really where coaching was leading. And there was a couple of individuals in my life at that time who were head coaches and senior coaches who saw that in me and developed that in me. And somewhere towards the end of my playing career, I started passing that on to the players I was playing with as well. You sort of get into that mentor leadership position within a team where you start realizing that you can have that influence. And I sort of like that, you know, not from an egotistical point of view, but certainly from a point of view that I could actually make change, I could influence others for the better. And that's sort of where it went from there.
What about sort of the situation of the different cultures? I mean, you were a successful coach in Hong Kong, and you come to Fiji, and now you're a successful coach in Fiji. How do you make that transition? In other words, what is it that you took from Hong Kong, or what needed to change when you came into the Fiji situation?
Well, I think obviously one of the biggest points of leadership for me is and some people might turn their noses up slightly on this, is flexibility. You know, I play a team sport. I'm not an individual who regards themselves as having all the answers, and I certainly try and instill that in any group that I'm involved with, is the ability to have an open dialogue, is the ability to factor in other people's opinions, and also to see that there's a different version of the world that they're going to recognise even though they've had the same experience as you. That's probably one of the things that, as I've come through my coaching career, I've developed more and more. When you're a player, you, as I said before, you're instilled to have this invincibility, to do these superhuman things, and to be single-minded in everything that you do. Obviously, when you find yourself in a leadership position, you've got to hold to a philosophy that you might have in the game, but you've also got to be able to have the flexibility to adapt that, knowing the people that you're working with, and knowing what makes them tick, knowing what view of the world they have, how their systems of learning, how they operate as a group. Hong Kong, as you identify, hugely different to Fiji, hugely different to Wales. But I think that obviously my time in team sports as a player, and probably a little bit of my education and the way that I view the world myself, is that I like how other people are different. I like that diversity. I think that that brings the best out in people, and it's my job really at the top of that is to see how you marry that all together to get what you want in success. And even amongst the Fiji boys, whilst there's stark similarities within them, or them as a group, I mean, I've never been involved with a group that is so communal. I mean, an example being that I've never been in a group, but when we travel overseas, we do not move unless all the boys are there. They move as a group. We go to an airport, they're in a group. We check in, they're in a group. We move, we go through the lounge, we're in the lounge as a group. Then we move on, we go on the plane as a group. We get off the plane, we go somewhere else as a group. And that, in Wales and Hong Kong, you wouldn't get it. The players tend to be more independent, they have their own views on the world, they want to get out there and do it. They don't come together really until you get to a point where you're bringing back rugby issues into it. So that's an example of something that I found here, which was really powerful. I've never had that before. I never really thought about it before. And I had to, in my view of the differences between culture in Wales, Hong Kong, here, see how that could factor in to performance. Because ultimately, the only thing that I am selfishly looking at is 14 minutes on a rugby field. So everything we do, everything I do in terms of leadership, everything we do in terms of the planning and the development of the group is for 14 minutes. And that's all everybody else expects. They just see what goes on in that 40 minutes. And that 14 minutes basically is a mirror to what we are as a group.
Right.
Bad and good.
Right. Right.
And that then is where the leadership really comes in, is how do you evolve and develop that, bearing in mind the scrutiny that these players are under. I've never seen scrutiny like it. I really haven't.
Yeah. Now, what about the back? So, when things haven't gone so well, how do you, as the leader, sort of get them geared up to move into the next sort of game and sort of, produce the goods?
That's obviously an obvious challenge. Two ways. The first way is my behaviour.
Right.
I'm a mirror to them, and they will follow exactly how I behave. If I'm anxious, if I'm cross, it'll impart into them. And in an environment like in Sevens, where you go 2 days, where you're asked to play for 14 minutes, 6 times in a weekend against top international athletes from across the world. You're asked to warm up 6 times, you're asked to warm down 6 times, you're asked to play 6 times, you're asked to get on a physio bed those 6 times over the weekend. I mean, the fatigue levels go through the roof. If I'm not authentic and consistent with the way that I am, it's going to put them in a position where they're not staying true and authentic for the way they are. And that's a key element to what I try. And I've worked on that. I'm not saying that I had that all down when I first ever started coaching. Believe you me, I don't. And if you speak to my wife here, I'm sure the emotions that's going on at home are vastly different than what I feel. But I have to keep that in check. I have to give that view of performance to these players, not emotional ego that comes out at that time. And if that's a telling off, I've got to know where it's going to sit in terms of the progression of them as individuals and as a group. The other way is to ensure that they get feedback. And they get logical, exemplified feedback on how they can improve. So if something's gone wrong, I'll give an example. Jerry Tuai in the tournament the year before last, when we were in London, we had England on the rack. We had to win that game. We win the series. Jerry kicks the ball away, and then they go and score. We lose the series. And there were some horrible things said about Jerry, which I really resent in this part of the world, but that's as it is. But the process was, Jerry didn't intend to lose that game. He did something in that moment as an athlete, in that split second, which wasn't him. Where did it come from? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from pressure. And it came from our ability, not his ability, our ability as a team to manage that pressure in the moment. And that was a classic learning experience for the whole group. As hard as it was, as painful as it was, my leadership in that moment was to be able to pick up the learnings that had to be made on that and influence the group that it didn't ever happen again. And if it did, we'd have to come back to it and move on. So really keeping at the forefront of the players, the staff, the team that we have, my ability to influence them is going to be down to my ability to teach and to move them forward in that space, even if it is painful.
When you talk about authenticity as a leader, are you saying keeping your emotions in check, or is there more to it than that?
That's a part of it, certainly, because I think that what emotion tends to do to us is takes us out of character and puts us somewhere where people think, or we think people need us to be, rather than trusting instinct, staying with what you've put in practice as a system or a process for that group to learn, and then backing that up by your knowledge and the way you do it. I think that, especially with rugby players, they see lots of coaches in their lives. They can't obviously comment on other environments. But they know when you're being true and when you're not being true. And you know in that moment when you're talking to them, you might as well stop and walk out of the room and say, okay, I'm not going to do it here now. I'm going to get my emotions in check, and I come back and we're going to learn from this. Sometimes that is to blast them, if that is the right place. But not because you've created this inside you. It's because that you've got to recognise, for me, I've got to recognise that we as a group have to learn from that every time we've got an opportunity. And I've made mistakes in that, of course I have. And I'll impart them with the players. They've known, I've told them. I messed, that was on me. That was mine, and I've got to learn from that, and I've got to make it go forward. Because ultimately, they've got to see that, you know, as a leader in this environment, they're human too.
Right, yeah. We talked earlier when we were talking to Nigel, we were talking about how come, you know, given this very small nation, in terms of the sevens, they're world beaters. We were talking about the fact that the United States were doing very well, and then, you know, at the end of it, we picked them up at the post. What is it that, first of all, I think you probably repeat what we've said, but nevertheless it's good for these guys. What is it you think that leads to this world-beating sort of characteristic of the local lads? And how do you capitalise on that as a leader of the team?
Well, I think the thing with Fiji is, I mean, obviously you look at the game of sevens, the actual, the needs of the game are very akin to the way that Fijians are in terms of their athletic ability, but certainly they play the game. It's about pace, it's about power, it's about creation of space for others around you. It's like a big game of netball, it's like a big game of Gaelic football or Aussie rules, but you've got so much space on the field. And I think that the things that are here which are particular to Fiji are, one, a blessed genetic ability. So you range from players who are quick to players who are powerful to players who are tall to players who are small and steppy, which is what rugby is all about. So you've got one bit going on there. I think the next bit is probably we were talking earlier about specificity of the game that they play. And when you tour Fiji, you go and have a look, it is a cliche, because it's a reality that the way these kids play is exactly how we end up playing in a sevens environment. And it is very much based around no rules. It's very, I mean, when you watch us play, sometimes I'm stood there going, there's no rules in this game. Boys haven't recognised they're playing international rugby, there's just no rules. And that's a big learning for me, because I come from a structured development process where you teach players to go in a certain direction. I have to have hands off a bit here. I have to give them the space to be creative in those moments. And I think that happens all around Fiji all the time. On a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they're all playing. Again, we talked earlier, I'd see it similar to sort of football in Brazil in the 1970s, or cricket in India or Pakistan, or you would see it possibly in basketball in America, where there's this creativity that's born out of a game which kids and youths play, which has no rules. And what my challenge has been, and it was a challenge I'm sure of many coaches before me, and certainly Ben's challenge who was here before me as well, was how do you marry that up with having some of the parameters around the game which allow them to get to that bit, but then don't hinder them getting to that bit. And they're probably the two biggest ones. The third one is probably the way we play the game is a product of the way we are as a group, the enculturation process, and faith obviously plays, faith and community and family play a huge part in binding those other elements together. My challenge has been, how do I make all that fit together and run in the direction of performance? Those 14 minutes we keep talking about. So how does, when we go on the 40, you see all those bits come out? And you do. If I showed you a video now of us playing, you would see us doing our cheer at the beginning, the child up. You would see us doing the game of pace and power and speed. You would see us doing ridiculous things with the ball. You would also see us fail. And what's the response? The response is get yourself back in the game, get yourself back into the here and now, and play the game that we need to do.
You mentioned there, Gareth, faith. I know you're a Christian yourself, and of course, the lads that you're dealing with, generally speaking, are Christians too. How does that sort of aspect of leadership, how do you leverage, if that's the right word, how do you leverage the faith element to come into sort of performance, as it were, if you understand what I'm saying?
And you know, it's not just the Christian faith, I'm sure faiths all around the world. You know, there's athletes who have those different faiths who would use them in a different way. my model obviously is a Christian one.
Yeah.
Essentially, what you've got is a belief system, and what we're looking as leaders is to establish a belief system within a group, and that group to recognise what that provides them to go and do the superhuman things that they're required to do. And I think that as the players have taught me, we're in camp at the moment, we do low-two twice a day, 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock at night. They've taught me a lot in those low-two services that I attend about the teachings of the Bible. One key point for me is people tell me about Fijian rugby players that you can't give them too much information. That you can't make it too wordy. That you can't show them too much about how you need to think and play the game. Rubbish. They all know the Bible better than I'll ever know the Bible. And they know it in Fijian and they know it in English. And they know every parable, they know every reading, they know everything from it. Anybody who's got that deep set thought process is able to take anything I'm going to be saying to them in terms of a game you play with a egg-shaped ball. And that, those learning, those things that you can pick up from there. We've got, his father is in the room here. I have a S&C coach with me, sorry, a bit emotional. He's taught me a huge amount. He's taught me a huge amount about myself. But he's taught me a huge amount about how you bind these young men together to get past the challenges, the obstacles that we come against, which I never saw before I came here. I just watched rugby. And all of a sudden I come here and you have good people like that in your life. And you just want to be next to them. You want to be in the trenches with those guys. Because you know, if it's good or if it's bad, we're doing this together. And that's really powerful.
I remember talking to you before about the way you sort of have the way of dealing with the psychological element, let's say, of leadership. And you were talking about the way in which the All Blacks and the New Zealanders are, in a sense, held in awe here. I mean, we see that here. And you talked about how do you get the, what's the natural reaction of a Fijian lad confronted with the New Zealanders, and how do you get them to play them to their best effect, given that they're playing against their, let's say, their heroes?
Again, I think that, you're right. I hadn't recognised until about a year and a half ago, we played New Zealand a few times, and there was a couple of players that, exceptional rugby players playing for us who didn't find the same level of performance when they played against New Zealand, and or it would spill over, and they would almost get too emotional. I come back a bit towards that authenticity. We talk a lot about it as a group, about them staying emotionally in the times of pressure and the critical moments in the game, what we call the here and now. And outside of that, there's two sides to that. There's one element where the pressure gets too much and you want to back away and you want to hide, and I've seen that. And there's the other one where it spills over and you get too emotional, you want to dominate the space and you want to get physical against something. And that's what we've tended to have more than anything else. So what I try and do is keep them in the here and now. One of the things, obviously, against New Zealand is we weren't doing that. We weren't staying where we needed to stay. And I couldn't quite work out why a lot of that was. And I work with a mental skills coach as well for myself. I also work with him with the team. There's a gentleman who named Jay Headley, who works in the coaching room. I work online, it's very good. And he spent some time with us. And he got to the bottom of the view of the Fijian players, the young boys who had grown up with the All Blacks being the best team in the world, of beating Fiji, of winning World Cups, of winning 15s World Cups. And it was almost this view that they held New Zealand players up here as big icons in these big black jerseys that were going to come and run over the top of them. And we tried to break that myth. And we sort of got back to the basics of that view. And one of the exercises we did with them was a visualization process as a group. And we got players to visualize the New Zealand boys as small boys, as if you're on a camera from above. And they were little boys with black and white, so you dampen down the effect. of these little boys running around on a field.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's going to last forever, but it was
Right.
one of the sort of strategies we used to
Right.
take away this myth that we have to do something different when we play against New
Right,
Zealand. We
right.
don't. We do the same as what we do against everybody else.
Right.
Because it's in those moments that we show the best of Fijian, not in the moments when we feel we need to jump up and do something different. And it comes back to that consistency.
What you say, how far does what you say to them really count? I mean, you know, you're saying certain things to them, you're communicating certain things to them. The sort of type of words you use, I'm trying to get at, the type of words you use, do you choose your words carefully? Or do you just basically, I'm not saying don't think about it, but it doesn't become a major issue? When you sort of try to lift them, or in their difficulties, or some conflict, how do you work with that?
I think it is the crux of being a leader, is understanding the rapport you build with an individual and how you word that is vital. The other bit is how you behave.
Right.
People can see changes in body language far quicker than they can probably hear words. And I think that is hugely important to what we do. I remember one criticism after we came back from a couple of early tournaments where we hadn't played well, and the public wanted to know why I wasn't blasting the players at half time. Why wasn't I screaming at them? And I sort of thought to myself, well, whose emotion are we talking about here? Because that's not the way I coach. That's not authentic to me. Part of that process in half time is to get them fixed in the way that I believe. Might be the way the public believes, it has to be different. The way that I believe, and the language I use in that moment, the way that I behave in that moment, can turn a player like that.
Right, okay.
And then, you know, they're in a state at that point,
Right.
of being able to absorb anything you say.
Yeah.
But I don't always get it right.
Right.
And certainly, as a coach, you have to be very careful that it's not cathartic coaching. It's not cathartic communication. You're not saying it because you just want to get that verbal diarrhea out there. You want to get it out so everybody can hear.
Right.
You have to pick your moments of when you're going to do it and be smart about that. And again, as I said, when you need to tell it off, you need to tell it off.
Right.
If somebody hasn't honoured what the group requires, if they haven't done their job and what we've agreed they should do, and obviously there's a time and a place for that. But it has to be done in the correct way with the correct language. So the language is vitally important. I tried to use as many Fijian words as I can. You know, my ability to have a conversation in Fijian is very limited, but the boys know my rugby speak. They know what I'm trying to communicate, and you know, they're great. You know, getting that message across through a Jerry or through a Paula, who's our captain, or Kali Masoko. You know, they're taking the temperature of the players. They can see what they're doing when they're listening to me. You know, and not everybody listens on your words. Some people will be looking over there, but that's how they take in information. So I'm vitally important. It is vitally important to recognise, I think, in your own leadership is what is the version of you that people are seeing? What is it you're communicating with them? And especially those ones that you need to influence. How do we create that success and what we need to do?
I want to just ask you about you're talking about like as a team. You're all there as a team doing things as a team, collectively. You said everywhere you go, you basically want as a team. But how do you balance that against individuals? You must have dialogue, I'm sure, with each individual. How do you sort of, you know, how do you deal with individuals rather than the team?
How do you deal with a family? You know, I've got 3 kids, they're all different. I have to have conversations with them. Again, my wife would probably say not very good conversations on time, but you know that you want to be a group as a family. You want to hold to values, and we have a value system within our group of players. You know, in a family, sometimes you don't have to write them down. In a group, obviously, or as a team, you have to do that. And you have to behave them. And we talk a lot about the behaviours that we show. So what does, we have values, one of them being effort. What does effort look like? Effort's not just about getting yourself up off the floor in a rugby field and running quicker than anybody else. It's about making sure you're at load on time. It's about making sure you're wearing the right clothing. It's about making sure that if somebody can't be there, you've got to make sure that they can be with us. So we talk a lot about the behaviours around all of that to make those things work.
Just sort of moving into your history, what would you say, I think the answer is probably now, but the low points, would you say, in your career as a coach? Have you dealt with those low points? And, what are the high points? And how is that sort of, how does that read into your coaching?
I think certainly in a coaching perspective, I've had obviously a few low points. I was head coach at Cardiff Blues when we lost the quarter-final of the European Cup to Leinster. Not only did we lose it, we got absolutely hammered. And you have to go away and get a bit introspective. But there was a learning experience in that for certain, and I got that. I think probably not getting to the Olympics in the repechage with Hong Kong was a big one for me, because we were very much fighting above our weight, but we played some great stuff and we created a good group team dynamic. I wanted that to have that next lift. And probably here in Fiji would be not capturing the World Series in 2017-18 and potentially not getting to a final in the World Cup, which was tough to take as well. What I have learned from them is I've learned that you as a person, as a leader, although it might be burning inside you and screaming and shouting, is again, you have to stay consistent and authentic in what you're doing. And equally, you have to do the same thing when it goes well, because the players are looking at you as a model. How do we behave in these circumstances? And here in Fiji, again, very unique situation that we have the players that are existing or playing in our squads at the moment. The majority of them, maybe to a man, have come from village rugby.
Right.
And they've come from village rugby to playing on an international stage, which is so different to their background and where they're from and how they've grown up. And they look to me certainly as providing them with that stability and that consistency to mirror for their future development. And again, I'll come back to Nather's thing is about building better men for Fiji. And we recognise the responsibility that we have not only within a rugby environment but as members of society as well. And I think that win or lose, I want them to replicate those behaviours. What I would say is that what I've been most proud of probably in the team is win or lose, we operate exactly the same way on the field. And we are the first ones. Jerry Tuai is the first person to congratulate somebody whether he's won or whether he's lost. And that is the humility that this team and this country shows. I mean, you just have to be in anybody's company here in a group, the humility that is here, that nobody feels that they are bigger than the group itself, and their relationship, with each other and within that team ethic, that group, that communal bond that they have is far stronger than I've ever seen anywhere else.
Let me ask you something a bit more personal now, although it has been personal, but this is a bit more personal to you. All this adulation, I mean, we saw only not too long ago, we were in one of these, what do they call it, the ginger kitchen or whatever they call it, I don't remember. But cafe, that's Ginger Cafe, and it said something like a rise, Sir Gareth. Now, how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you sort of deal with all this adulation wherever you go? Everybody, knows you and wants to sort of have a photograph taken with you. I've been in seminars, let me tell you before, I've been in a seminar here where the place has been empty. You notice that that's not the case here. So how do you deal with that on a personal basis?
Well, again, it's been a learning process. I was taken a little bit aback. I knew it was going to, because I had spoken to Ben as well, and I knew that the profile of the position came with expectation, scrutiny, but certainly it was in the forefront of everybody's minds. Probably similar to being England's soccer manager, being potentially the All Blacks coach. But I had to go and learn that for myself, and I had to learn what the environment was like, and they come back to the scrutiny of these players I put under and learn all that process. And part of it was me to learn that as well. Look, it's lovely. I can't think that I've ever had a Fijian come up to me and say something nasty to me, which, you know, at times is probably justified in the way that I've done things. I know that social media is a completely different story, but again, you've got to see it for what it is. What is the intention of what those comments have been? And I like the handshakes and the people wanting photographs. You know, again, you know, sometimes, you know, you're going out with family, you want to get on with things, but I appreciate that people, you know, are proud of what their team is doing, and I am probably in the middle of that, and they see me as being a part of that, and to be able to give that back to Fiji is, I think, is one of my proudest moments. Dealing with both sides of it can be tough. Dealing with media can be tough, especially when you can see things put back in the paper which is not how you put them out there. Shall we say. But I think you've got to treat all of that as one. I think if you start believing, you know, I think Sir Alex Ferguson, the Man United, you can't believe everything that's good. If you're going to believe everything's good, you've got to believe everything's bad. So stick yourself somewhere in the middle, keep consistent with the way that you view these stories, and don't take too much on. You know, don't accept adulation from anybody. You will accept being a critic of yours. You know, it's pretty much how I see it. So if somebody is having that conversation with me and they can crit me, then, you know, obviously if they pick me up on times, then I can deal with that. But outside of that, I would try and treat them the same. It's part of my job. I understand where it comes from on times, both negative and positive.
Now, you were talking about how the lads sort of are on the international stage, and then they leave the international stage off season and they go into the villages, and the lifestyle in the villages is very different. How do you sort of mentor them, or, you know, to sort of cope with that total different sort of that contrasting experience?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, because you only have to step off 2 or 3% of what we put into them when they're with us, and when we have that influence on them as a group of staff, a group of players, the sort of the interdependence that we have as that group. You only have to step 2 or 3% away from that, and you'll lose an international athlete very, very quickly. And that could be through influences, of alcohol or food. It could be just bad behaviour generally. It could be drugs. It could be, obvious issues that they can find themselves getting into trouble with. And that is a big challenge about us. It's a big challenge of, the players that have gone overseas, the guys you see playing for the Flying Fijians at the moment, or have been, a lot of them would have been, if you like, come up through a finishing school of going overseas, having 3-4 years of getting to learn the system, learning what it is to be a professional player, learning what it is to eat properly, to look after yourself, look after others around you, what your responsibility is in terms of a contract. What does a contract mean? There's obligations, not just beyond just turning up for training and playing, there's obligations you have to have. And imparting some of that knowledge to the players that we're trying to develop here who don't have those learnings is a huge part of what we do. What we try to do is obviously, when they go back to the village, we, with my manager, Johnny Nuro, and Tomasi Thama, who obviously played for Fiji previously, and Joe Salo, who's coached Fiji, is try to get to the families in the villages to educate the immediate families and the chief of the village to understand how we can support that individual so that he can make that leap consistently to where we need him to be. So we do go out to the villages and see families, mums and dads, brothers and sisters. We spend time, speaking to them about thanking them for obviously what they've done in the first instance of supporting the individual to this point. How can they continue that to happen? And getting back in there and helping and doing that is one of those mechanisms we use. But it's tough, and we use hard hard measures when they come back into training, like fitness testing or gym testing. Obviously, from my perspective as a rugby coach, I'm looking at what they can do on a rugby field. And if we feel people drop below that or drop off the standards, if they don't show the right behaviours that we regard as being professional players, then we have a system by which, almost like the 3 strikes and out policy that they go through. And involved in them would be our leadership group as well, who would, almost from a player perspective, share that leadership with the staff and the management to ensure that we're doing the right thing by the individual.
How do you deliver bad news? Gareth? Let's say one of them, if you feel that the form is down, they've got to be out of the team, they've got to be dropped, someone else has got to be brought in. How do you convey that message to them?
I think I'd normally speak to some of the senior players. I'd speak to them to get their information. Not that they're going to change my mind necessarily, but to see how I handle it.
Right.
Because players know players better than anybody. They're as close to them, and the Fijian boys see it. They know exactly what the standards are. If they didn't know what the standards were, if they didn't know what those set behaviours and those rules were, I wouldn't be doing my job correctly.
Right.
So they almost see it before I see it.
Yeah.
And that's when it's pretty powerful that I'm coming to have that conversation with them. They, if I like Paula Sikula or Kali Nasoko or Jerry Tuai, they know. And I've had some horrible conversations with a few players. And as I come to them, they say, Coach, we know it's got to be done.
Right.
And that in itself is very powerful for me.
Right.
Now, how do I show that? Well, obviously, one of the big ways is take my emotion out of it, my ego out of it, and ensure that I deliver it for the betterment of that individual. And even when I have to drop, it's not disingenuous, when you've had to drop a player, it's giving them some advice on how they can make it back to where they need to be.
Okay. Yeah.
And leaving them again, feedback is I know it's a commonly used term in management, but certainly in leadership, is I always think it through, try to think it through, and stress myself many times on making sure that they're left with something that's going to move them in that direction. Ultimately, they're grown human beings, and they're men, and they have to find their way of fitting that into their view of the world. And if they can do that, do you know what? They might find themselves back into our environment if they can show those behaviours to get back in them.
One of the things that, as you know, I'm interested in leadership as an academic sort of discipline and a practical discipline. And why I think that you're significant in this series of ours is because the results of your leadership are almost visible to the whole world when you're in the tournaments. If you were to give, based on your experience, if you were to sort of say, these are my principles of successful leadership, which are not just for, sports, but would cut across, different sort of walks of life, what would you say, or let's say 1, 2, or 3 basic principles you think that every leader should follow to have a fair chance of being successful?
I think the first, not most obvious one, would be authenticity. I think that if you try and be somebody else, if you try, we all pinch things off each other, as coaches.
Yeah.
But I think that when you're in a position of influence, if you're not authentic, and that comes back to your own value system, your own attitudes and behaviours, the way that you have an understanding of yourself and portray that to others that you're trying to influence. If you're not in the crucial moments, they'll see right through it.
Right.
When people talk about losing the dressing room, to me that's essentially what happens. A coach becomes outside of something which would put him there in the first place, and trust that. So authenticity would be the biggest one. Secondly to that, I'd probably say an empathy. The ability to empathise. It doesn't come readily to everybody, but I think that an ability to put yourself in another person's shoes and or put yourself back here and view a relationship between 2 or 3 people is hugely important in leadership, because what might happen for one person or the way that one person might see it is not necessarily the way all three of them are going to see it.
Right.
And your view is to be able to cut through that and to be able to see how that operates together.
Right, okay.
And that's a real powerful, it's been certainly a growth in mine, is to be able to step through the quadrants of personality
Right.
and to be able to see how you develop as an individual, to almost have like a fourth person perspective on
Right,
things.
right,
You
yeah.
can step back, see how it works, and be able to manage the group
Right.
in all of that. I think the third one, we said this about Fijians,
Right.
is have fun.
Right.
It's have fun.
Yeah,
I can be dull and boring, I know I can.
Yeah.
But I'm determined to have fun, and probably one of the things that has come back into my coaching and the way that I deal with people and I give leadership is to ensure that there is something that we all enjoy doing beyond the normal rudiments of being a professional rugby player. What are we going to do and have a bit of a laugh? Now, Fijian boys don't need much encouragement to do that for certain. They like having fun, which makes it so much easier for me. The hardest part from us, my perspective, is damping down the fun. So using that bit to motivate them, to develop them, but also to motivate and develop myself. You know, ultimately, I want to have some fun with what I'm doing. I don't want to feel the pressure and feel that scrutiny. I want to stick to some principles that I've always enjoyed in being involved in the sport that I love, and that's sort of, those three.
So I'm not going to hog this. I know that people want to ask some questions, so I'm going to just ask you this. I think this is my final question. I'll throw it open to the floor, and also to you guys who are watching from the various campuses. There's not just these people, there's campuses all over the place which are looking at this. Where do you go from here? I mean, here you are now, like in a sense, at the top of the game, lauded and so on in the sevens sort of situation. And you've obviously got things to do still in Fiji, but where do you go from here, guys, now? After you spell here?
I think probably as I've developed as a coach, I think as a young coach, you want to prove yourself, you want people to see you. You're certainly at an egotistical point, probably in your coaching, because you have to, after being a player where it's a lot about ego, you get to a position where you almost have to start pushing that ego to one side and thinking for others. I think I've sort of morphed as a coach, and I'm actually at a point now, and it might sound a bit cliched, but I just love the challenge of the process, good and bad. I like being in that situation where I can view myself 6 months ago to where I am now. Again, my family, my wife will say, I always go after challenges, not major ones. I don't want to climb Mount Everest or anything like that, but certainly not today. But I like what's next. I like knowing that there's going to be something that is going to test me and challenge me and move me on. I wouldn't have come to Fiji in the first place if I didn't accept challenges and want to go and do it.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm so excited about this next year that I have ahead of me.
Yeah, sure.
People might look at it and think how daunting that might look from my perspective. But again, an Alex Ferguson who stayed, I'm not comparing myself with Alex Ferguson here, but stayed at the top of the football game in Britain for like 30 years. I mean, in Britain and soccer, that's as ruthless and as cutthroat as it is. And he often talks about him reinventing himself through that time as a coach, moving himself on, moving players on, the next challenge, rotating plays, bringing in new ones, moving on old ones, changing the way that you play. All those things fit very much into the way that I view it. I think that, to finally answer your question, that once I do finish in Fiji, what I want to do is keep that process moving, whatever that may be. And I also want to possibly challenge it academically as well. I do have an academic background. I would like to get back into that and really challenge and test my thoughts on imparting some of what we're talking here formally, and marrying that up with the likes of academia, and seeing potentially back in my home country of Wales, because obviously that's where I was born and brought up, and getting some real learning out of what my experience has been, and then that moving me on again and helping me with the next challenge and the next challenge.
Very good. Okay, I think I've said enough. So now I want to throw it open to anybody here. We have him here, right? We're not going to be able to have him for very much longer because you're going to be on the road.
all the time. So let's take the opportunity from the floor, any questions you'd like to ask, and can we have the mics? Can we get the mics over to the Dean Ethy over there? The mic's coming, Ethy.
Hello. Thank you, Gareth. That was such an interesting and inspiring session. What I wanted to ask you was, what is the selection criteria that you use when you're choosing the captains of the team? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I would say, obviously, you're going to need somebody who's going to be playing. So you're looking at one of those players who's going to be in that top 1 through to 7 quite regularly. Now, my objective view of it is not necessarily going to be what other coaching staff would see. So obviously sitting with them and going through what we're looking for is a huge element. The biggest one for me is behaviour. Is an individual who has the capability of withstanding pressure and ultimately is able to display the values in practice, the behaviours that you as a group have established, and that we've done that as a team. So they're not necessarily what I say they've got to do. And we have 3 values. We have teamwork, we have effort, and we have humility. Those are our 3 values. They chose them. They live by them. And the captain has to epitomise that at all times. And on the guys that I have, they can fall, I understand that, they can make mistakes. But they always know where it is to come back to. And ultimately, I'm looking for that all the time. And when you look across those, when you look at teamwork, effort, and humility, it's quite hard possibly to rank what the behaviours would be. But they would be obvious to us within a group, you know, in terms of efforts. Paolo Granisinicula, who is the captain, has a military background, is growing as a leader every day. And he is the first in and last out. He is always dressed properly. He was always on time. He understands others' points of view. He makes the ultimate sacrifice on the field time and time again. He believes in everybody but himself. Same with Jerry. Jerry does it a slightly different way. That's why Jerry was made captain. Same with Callie. And these boys who have been captain for Fiji have really had that same sort of process that they've operated under. And it's certainly as what we regard as a team ethic is something they epitomise in terms of their behaviours all the time.
Thank you. And if I can just give my final question. How close are you to your senior players in the team? And how is that reflected in the kinds of communication and group dynamics that you undertake?
Obviously, there's going to be, as a head coach, there's going to be a level that the players operate at that you possibly don't get into. It's one of the things that's been hardest for me as a coach. As a young coach, you can sort of stay around it as a skills coach. Then you move on to as you go up the ranks of being a coach, you start to move further and further away from being a player. And I loved being a player. I did it for 16 years of my life. It was fantastic. But you get to a point where they've got to have their space and you've got to have yours. They respect mine, I respect theirs. But ultimately, I've got to establish that relationship and that rapport with that senior group of players. Am I their best friends? No, I'm not their best friends. Am I respected by them? I like to think I am. Do I respect them? Yes, I certainly do. We respect each other because of the way that we behave with each other. And the way we behave with that is with respect, on the way we communicate. It's the way that we operate in that group environment. And it's the way that I can see them leading others. And that relationship is strong. Yeah, it's got to be very strong in a pressurised environment like we are. And again, I'll come back to it, we're not saving lives. I know we're not saving lives. But we've got to be able to understand each other in those pressure moments to be able to be successful together and not have the confrontations. But when we do end up there, we've got to be able to resolve them, is normal management speak, you know, amicably, and do it with the purpose of moving the group on. So there's not much they wouldn't tell me. They would discuss it and how to give that information, and there's been some things around the group, the team lately, that obviously are relevant to us and how we behave and how we move on, we find solutions together. And if I didn't have that rapport and that bond, then what you see on the field wouldn't work.
Naka.
Next question, yeah. Next question. Raise your hand. The mic will be coming. Here we go.
This will be a tough one.
Yeah, thank you, Baber. I'm saying thank you on behalf of FNU for winning the 2018-2019 IRB series and winning the back-to-back in Paris and London. It takes a good leader to achieve that. My question is, what is your coaching philosophy? You know, winning back-to-back, and you are dealing with an Olympic team. Many of the players have left, and under your supervision were new players, and many of these, we call them, they are village boys. So it's a miracle, and boils down to your coaching philosophy. And here in this room, there are some coaches here. They would like you to share this experience with us. Thank you.
Told you it's a tough question. I think my overall coaching philosophy is probably very similar to as I am as a dad. Get the best I can out of a person. And that's not the same for everybody. It wasn't the same for Osir Kolinisau as it was for Jerry Turai, as it is now for these young boys that are coming into our group. And I think that somewhere along the line I've learned in my roundabout way of how I can build rapport with individuals, how I can influence them, how I can guide them through the processes and the changes in their lives, the pressures that they're going to get. I have half an experience of living at this level as these boys do. I played for Wales, I didn't play for Fiji, but I'm also appreciative of what they have to do to get themselves at where they need to. I've been asked that question a few times about philosophy, and I think a rugby philosophy is slightly different to a philosophy general in life. My philosophy in life is generally to get the best out of people. That's why I probably ended up teaching and why I've ended up coaching. I couldn't see it when I was 25, I probably couldn't see it when I was 35, but I see it certainly now looking back on myself, that I had some of those characteristics. I think in a rugby perspective, it is that ability to get the best out of an individual of what they're good at. And I think that rugby as a sport is one of the few sports that allows you to do that now because of the multiple elements of a game that an individual has. We frame up job descriptions for each player. I've been through them with them this week, so a prop would be different to a hooker, would be different to a halfback, to a playmaker, a rover winger, and all the boys know what their job descriptions are. But within that is getting them to be the best at them, getting the best, and giving them this ability to be creative, to put something of themselves into it, to show the world what God has provided and blessed them with, this ability, this unique ability to go and do things that people only ever dream of doing, of showing that to be consistent time and time again. And that sits at the root of the philosophy that we have. And I know along with our staff that we very much believe that that's the way. There's an old adage, it's an old adage, it's an All Blacks sayism, I think that's a word, which is the best people make the best players. I wholeheartedly believe in that. I've been around enough rugby players in my life. I've seen the ones that have been successful. I've seen the ones that can handle pressure. I can see the ones who can be consistent, look after others, and look after a team. And that's essentially what we're talking about here, is rugby is a team sport, it's not an individual sport. I've never played an individual sport, probably for obvious reasons, which is I love the interaction with human beings and making that what we can get to be successful in a group, i.e. a team environment. And releasing people's potential is always what I look at. And I get very frustrated, like many of you here are parents, when an individual can't see that themselves, that they don't see that they can be that. Not they don't see the route to it, they can't see what they can be. And that's the most powerful thing, is when you actually get somebody towards that. I mean, to see the development, somebody like Jerry Tua, the senior development, he is a village kid, as it is. He is what I would hold up as a Fijian player. He is the best sevens rugby player in the world, bar none, in my view. And he's done that consistently for the last 5 years. And the development he's shown as a young kid coming into I think Ben talks about in his book, hiding behind bushes so he didn't have to do the fitness testing, to taking the team, to me having that conversation with him about being a captain, and him turning to me, even though I know it wasn't in his nature, saying, if it's good for the team, that's what we need to do. It breaks my heart saying it now. And then he goes through that, and he makes some errors in a game that people lambast him for. And then he comes back and becomes world player. And that shows me that we're doing something right. And that shows me exactly now, that individual now can go and do whatever he likes in life. Because that learning of an 8-year period, which your son has had the biggest influence on, might I add, I think is so powerful.
Another question, take the opportunity. Raise your hand, don't be shy. Bruce.
Does he need a mic?
Gareth, congratulations on the win from last year. In team sport, where does, and I'm encouraged by your value set, especially with humility, where does the lack of humility impact ego play a part in today's team as a leader?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think they wouldn't do it if there wasn't an element of ego. There's got to be an element of ego. And when we talk about ego, we talk about belief in yourself, the way you do things. But it's probably that spillover into ego becoming bigger, certainly in a team sport, than the team. And reminding players, again, I'm blessed here in Fiji, there's not many egos. People might say, I think there was a perception out there about Osio Kulinisau, about that he was egotistical. Nonsense. He was driven. He wanted to be the best player he could possibly be. He didn't take any nonsense. But again, I'll take you back to the captain's values. He was always there first, he was always there last, he was always the hardest working, he cared for everybody in the team but himself. To the outside world, that came across slightly differently. But I think that in team sports, when ego starts to detract from what those values as a group are, that's when it's doomed. And I'm very interested sometimes to possibly go and investigate in American sport, because there's a lot of egos in American sport that goes with the money. And I'd really like to understand how that gets managed in those sports, because I find it very difficult to combine that into a team ethic based on those individuals thinking they might be bigger than the team. And that's the business end of it. Soccer the same in Britain. When I was at Cardiff, we shared a facility with Cardiff City. And it's almost a different vibe that soccer has to rugby. They're all very individual. They come together and play on the same pitch, but it's like they're a group, not a team. And I think that probably the most successful soccer teams, I look at Liverpool now, look at Man City and stuff in the UK. Jurgen Klopp, who manages Liverpool, has if you hear, I say now, I've listened to him, so I probably reiterate a little bit about what he says. He's very similar in terms of the bind of what a team looks like beyond the ego in the individual, as is Pep Guardiola with Man City. And they would say that you can suffer it for a season or 2 seasons, but when it starts to take over the dynamic of the group and the value system and the behaviours of the group, that's time that they go. And Sir Alex Ferguson with Man United was a master at it. An absolute master. He could see from about 12 to 18 months out where that player would be in 18 months' time and start that ball rolling so that ego didn't become a problem for that group. And it would be interesting for me as a challenge if I found myself in that, how would I react to it? Because at the moment, I'm not entirely sure how I'd react to it. I'd have to rely on probably learning that I've had previously and move that. But yeah, my take on it would be you've got to be very careful with the ego overtaking the team down.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've got, I know Gareth has got other commitments, so I'm not going to sort of, please come forward. We've got time for perhaps a couple of more questions, so please take the opportunity. Yes, Nigel.
It was an absolutely brilliant conversation between you two. I really enjoyed it. And I'm just kind of very struck. I mean, it's very clear that this Sevens team is kind of special. It's very bonded. As you talked about, it's a family, and you're part of that family. What strikes me though is that and you've made a number of parallels between the teams of family and your own family. I mean, the difference between family and, of course, the team is that you can't fire your kids. I mean, you kind of
I could try.
but they're, you love them for better or worse forever. And I suppose what I'm kind of interested in is, you've also talked about people like Alex Ferguson. When you come into these kind of roles for 4 years, and you came in at a time when you were having to rebuild the team that kind of peaked and was now having to bring fresh blood in, you can kind of have that family ethos because you're bringing people in. But I'm wondering how challenging it would be to try and be the Alex Ferguson and not do it for a 4-year contract, but for a 30-year contract, because it means saying to people, it's time to go. And I think that's one of the most challenging things to do, is, you've got a Jerry Two-White, but he's getting older, his performance has dropped off. You've got to say farewell to a member of the family, how you would tackle that. So I guess I'm just interested in, how you dismantle a family and reinvent a family without breaking it up.
Yeah, well, I can't say I'm Sir Alex would have done it, but I think one of the key points for what we do is that we create, obviously, around the players an understanding, and it's true that this is a development phase in their life. I know it's quite a high-level development phase in their life, don't get me wrong, but it's part of their process. And again, it probably comes back to the way I think of my own life and the way that I coach, is that this is part of their process, that they will come into this environment, but they will move on. So it's not giving them this false hope that this is the way it's always going to be and you're going to stay in here for 15 years. They know that they've got to come in and they've got to stay in that environment and earn the right, we say, to keep onto that jersey. So that would be one thing. So there's almost in their heads already, there's a movement through their playing career, which we look after. One of the things that obviously happens here a lot in Fiji is that players get seen from overseas and agents come in and want to take them away and pay them big money. And part of the ethos in here in Fiji is that the players are good for that we should promote them, we should take them off because we don't have the ability to rise them up again. I struggle a little bit with that because I'd love to see them all stay here in Fiji, but I have to be realistic about how we can hold on to them. So supporting them in that is another method by which they can see the families looking after their future as well. I think that another bit of it, another chunk, is they set the rules. It's not my way or the highway, which is a lot of leadership, a leadership mechanism. There are certain things that I don't negotiate on. But the way the family or that group comes together is built on their values, is built on their understanding of their faith and their culture. It's been hugely important for me to ensure that I bring a lot of what meaning to be Fijian is about into that group, so that they're not seeing the way that we operate as something completely different. It's part of their process as they go. And if they don't live up to it, do you know what? They're going to have to leave it. They're going to have to move on. And I think when you talk about Alex Ferguson, although he reinvented squads and might have moved with them, there were some key non-negotiables that he would not have budged on. And there was also the myth and the legend of being Man United. There's a myth and a legend of being the Fijian Sevens team, because they won the Hong Kong Sevens the first time in 1976, no other team has won it as many times. That creates almost its own standards and measures that these players know they've got to be in. And the humility side of it is they know they're not bigger than that. If I get one that comes in who's bigger than that, I'll see it very quickly. And sometimes I've had to let players go because they haven't shown that humility, because their behaviours haven't displayed to us that they care about the group. And so they understand that this thing is something, again, the All Blacks have done something similar, that they're in for a period of time. They're looking after the jersey. the next one to come through. And when you can create that and you can bring them back to what the standard should be, if that's not quite happening, what I have to be smart with is seeing that a way out and being able to move that in the right direction. Retention of players, moving players on and recruiting players is a necessary process that any head coach should ever have to do. And how you handle those three things will really be at the nub of how successful you're going to be and how you can create that success as a team. Does that answer the question?
Can I take one last question?
Hello,
Where is it?
Professor Pan, up here.
I'm from Bolivia.
Mr. Gareth Baber, sir, congratulations on your achievements. You've done Fiji proud and.
Can you speak up a little bit, Anna?
Mr. Baber, I'd like to congratulate you. Job well done, and you've done Fiji proud. And my question is associated with responsibility. How far does your responsibility extend in terms of dealing with a super talented player who has a tendency to go rogue every now and then? I'm thinking of Nasila Sila right now. He's just been convicted of a serious crime. He's been sentenced to imprisonment. My question is, would you visit him? Why? And if you did, what would you say to him?
I think I just got to put in context, Anna is a lawyer, so this is
Oh, great. Yeah, to answer your question, yeah, it hurts massively to see, obviously, one of the players that you've had some influence with, and you would believe that you had positive influence on, fall like Noni has. I do have to understand that I can't solve all problems. I do have to understand that at the end of it, I'm not a social worker. And I do understand there's some things that I'm not going to be able to control in individuals' lives, but it still hurts because he's a super talented player. He's done something very wrong and been found guilty of it. Would I visit him? Yes, I would visit him. And I think that I wouldn't be being true to myself and the way that I think about the world and I think about individuals if I didn't do that, because ultimately he's done something wrong. He has a strong Christian faith, I know that for a fact, and he has to find his way back in life as well. He's a young man who's going to serve time in jail, and in that scares the living daylights out of me to be, again, my mental skills coach would say that sometimes I put myself too much in other people's shoes and take on their issues, and I see him and it does make me upset to see him, but he's got to find his way back, and I've got to be a part of that because I've had influence in his life, and now more than ever as a society you can measure yourself as a society and how much support and rehabilitation are we going to give to that individual. He's done a horrible thing. There's a horrible outcome of it in relation to obviously the girl who's in that as well, and I think for both of them they're going to need support. And as he said, I would yes, I'd go and visit him. What I'd say to him is like I would say if he wasn't hitting the true behaviours in what we do as a team, which is what has he got to do to get him where he needs to? What has he learned from that process? How is he going to make himself into, at some point, a valued member of society? Because that's what we want to see. I don't know whether his rugby career will ever get back, but he's forgone that by obviously putting himself into that position. So, yeah, it makes me very sad. Would I visit him? Yes. The reason I would is because I believe that somewhere in there I have a relationship with him, and I want him to rehabilitate himself and get himself into a position as a valued member of society.
I see there's a focus there on are you going to ask a question, Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Gareth, for very enlightening answers to Jim's questions. I wanted to ask you whether the different Fijian national coaches share technical ideas, and if you could have some advice for the flying Fijians just coming back from the World Cup. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I know John McKee very well. John and I speak a lot about rugby. The other senior coaches that have been with John's team, I've spoken to as well. It's good for my development. You know, I've spent time with the Flying Fijians in camp here in Fiji. I went to Japan and spent some time there when they were in Japan as well. And for me, I've got to keep developing. If I think I know it all, I'm dead. As a coach, if you think you're there, you're gone. You've got to keep on the challenge, you've got to keep moving and doing things differently. I think that the biggest challenge, and I said that with John and I at coffee last week, the biggest challenge that the Flying Fijians have against all of the teams that they're expected to compete with is, again, talent alone is not enough. And the issue is for me, is the time, knowing the Fijian people, but certainly players as I do now, is the building of a system which allows you to perform at those levels. That takes time. It's taken me 3 years to get to here. I don't know, I know where it's going now, but I can't tell you if it's going to be successful, although everybody in Fiji wants me to guarantee it's going to be successful, to bring the HSBC to the Olympics. I just know it's what I do as a coach, is to build a team over a period of time, take hits, learn from the hits and move on. And at this stage, I can't see how that's going to change for Fiji Rugby at 15s, because the way the World Rugby is set up at the moment, the competitions that exist, unless changes happen with the likes of Super Rugby, or the changes happen with the likes of the Championship or the Six Nations, then Fiji is only, the players are only going to get together at periods of time through a 4-year cycle prior to a World Cup. Whereas England and Wales and France and Australia and New Zealand will probably have double the time with each other because of the geography that they have and the ability to call these players in. And it's a huge problem, and I think it's even more evident in the Pacific Islands because we are so communal, because we need each other to operate at those levels. And we have super talent here, it's obvious. But winning World Cups, quarterfinals and semi-finals of World Cups, are a lot more than just having talent. They're how you're able to combine that, move it together, take challenges, overcome challenges, get highs in your game, and stay consistent time after time. So I don't believe that it's the wrong type of game that we're playing. I believe it's a product of the time, lack of time spent with each other, and the need to have influence on a group together. That is the sort of crux of what Fiji needs to look at moving forward to get into those quarterfinals and semi-finals. But as I say, the danger, the warning sign is we need more time together, we need those competitions to play.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Paul, for the question. I think I'm going to draw our formal session to a close now. Can we just show our appreciation of Gareth? I'll hand back over to the MC.
Great, interesting and inspiring for our conversation. It was, thank you, successful leaders in conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Gareth and for the a brief synopsis of what I gathered from the powerful tools and techniques was group teamwork, as we say, modeling, be a mirror, preaching what you practice, improvement plans, getting feedbacks and draw up improvement plans, ability to influence, faith, confidence, determination and respect add values to leadership, psychology, understanding and knowing the background of your employees is another important aspect. Conversation, communication and language is very important tool. Gauge the behavior and actions speak louder than words. So how you behave in front of your employees is very important. Being consistent and authentic mirror for the future of the employees. Relationships, ability to influence and having fun is important. Informal get-togethers is important. Let go of the critics and capitalize on it to make yourself better. Challenges will come, but there should be measures to adapt to that and change. Learning and development is important. ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Now it's time for appreciation. Thank you and appreciation. I request the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nigel, to present the token of appreciation to our chief guest. And Neha from the Pro Vice Chancellor's office is going to facilitate that. Thank you, Professor Nigel, and thank you, Gareth. You can take seat now. We are at the final lap of our program. Ladies and gentlemen, no program is successful without vote of thanks. Now, I kindly invite Professor James Pounder to give the vote of thanks.
Good to stand up and stretch my legs. Well, what can I say? What can we say? I mean, we have a gentleman here who's achieving a lot, will continue to achieve a lot. But why I invited him is because I know he's in a sense atypical, I think, being a sports coach, but someone who's a deep thinker. As you can tell, that there's no shortage of things he can share. When we ask him a question, he can share an amazing amount of information. He thinks deeply about what he does. It's not just a case, it's not just a sort of a gut reaction and this is what we're going to do and so on. There's a lot of thought going into this, and we can see that in everything he says. So really, I just want to just say, you know, it's been wonderful to have him. I hope that we can at some point again, have him again at some point. I know he's got a very busy schedule and a couple of years, a year or so ahead, which is going to be very busy, but you know, the type of wisdoms he shared, I think are fundamental, not just for rugby, but for being a leader in a variety of walks of life. So I just want to say once again to put our hands together and thank Gareth for his time he spent here to share those wisdom with us. So let's do that.